to Howard Avruhm Addison.
I'm humbled to
If you
be
need
in my
any
own
more sound
presence.
effects,
Thank you.
I got all the sound effects you want.
That's it. That's wonderful. Thank you. Well, friends, thank you so much for your patience and your perseverance in terms of joining with us this evening. So tonight's session is going to be in two parts. We're going to do a little didactic presentation in terms of the ambivalent relationship that Jewish tradition has with dreams, and it's actually a very long and rich tradition that kind of moves back and forth, as it were, and not dissimilar to what we find with other traditions as they move from their birth stage to becoming more institutionalized and then trying to be renewed, as it were, and dreams being a source of that renewal. And then the second part of the session, we're actually going to look at a biblical dream, a record of a biblical dream, one that you're all familiar with, and kind of have a chance to work with that as a sample dream, right? Like, okay, and this is we're going to be looking at the dream of the royal cupbearer and the chief baker in Pharaoh's court. And of course, Joseph is known as the Baal HaChalom, right? The master of dreams, that his brothers actually called him in a derogatory fashion, because of the dreams that he had, that somehow he was going to be lording it over them. And so we're going to be looking at that particular dream and going to work with it in a couple of ways to give us some experience in terms of working with dreams. And that's going to lead us to next week, where we're going to spend a little time at the beginning looking at the question of dreams during dark, threatening, but hopeful times. Right? I've been very moved over the course of the last few years, from the time that I first came in contact with a book written by a Jewish social worker in Nazi Germany who fled in 1939, and the second edition of the English translation has just been released a year ago by Princeton, called The Third Reich of Dreams, right, where she recorded 300 people's dreams, 300 dreams from 33 to 36 till she had to flee. Right, because she had a terrible nightmare and wondering how this oppression and persecution and the violence was infecting the collective unconscious of people, and then being showing up in people's dreams, and what it was predicting in terms of what it was going to happen, and the wisdom gems that might have helped people navigate the situation that they found themselves in. And we know that for many people, this is an analogous situation that we're finding now within our world. And then next week we'll then also do a sample dream group. We're going to do and so we're going to ask you to think about, if you have dreams during the week, see if you can mark them down, and we're going to do the projective group dream process. And actually have a chance to model and experience what it is to work in a group with a dream. So to move into our material, this is my favorite dream poem that was written by a French poet named Charles Pegouy, who died right at the beginning of World War I. He died right in the fall of 1914. Okay? And so if you're on mute, which would probably be good, Reb Mark, can I ask you to read this, and we'll all be on mute, and we'll read along with you, if that's okay.
Rabbi Mark, you just muted yourself.
Thank you. The Lord God said, I myself will dream a dream within you. Good dreams come from me. My dreams seem impossible, not too practical, nor for the cautious man or woman. A little risky sometimes, a trifle brash perhaps. Some of my friends prefer to rest more comfortably in sounder sleep with visionless eyes. But from these who share my dreams, I ask a little patience, a little humor, some small courage, and a listening heart. I will do the rest. Then they will risk and wonder at their daring, run and marvel at their speed, build and stand in awe at the beauty of their building. You will meet me often as you work, in your companions who share your risks, in your friends who believe in you enough to lend their own dreams, their own hands, their own hearts to your building. In the people, you will find your doorway. Stay a while and walk away knowing they too can find a dream. There will be sun-filled days and sometimes it will rain. A little variety, but both come from me. So, come now, be content. It is my dream you dream, my house you build, my caring you witness, my love you share. And this is the heart of the matter.
Amen. Mark, I'll send you a copy of this poem so that you can distribute it to people if they would like it. It's beautiful, and I find it moving every time that I listen to it. Right? It's my dream you dream, my house you build, my caring you witness, my love you share, and this is the heart of the matter. So, friends, as I had mentioned at the beginning, Judaism has a very ambivalent relationship towards dreams, going back to the Torah and to the Hebrew Bible itself. And actually, in one of the first 20th century studies of Jewish dreaming, was written by a professor at Spertus College in Chicago, Montford Harris, a study of in Jewish dreaming. And that's like the title of his first chapter, Ambivalence. Okay. And so we can see, like, from the beginning of our tradition, that on the one hand, the book of Joel prophesies that it'll come about after this, that I will pour out my spirit on humankind. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your elderly will dream dreams. Your young will see visions. And counterposed to that, also, in this case, in the writings in Ketuvim, is from Kohelet, from Ecclesiastes, in which the teacher is saying, through a multitude of dreams and impermanence, the Hevel, which is his word, usually literally translated as vanities, there are many words, right? You can find a lot of stuff in dreams, but one should only revere God. Okay, so on the one hand, we have this eschatological vision that at the end of days, everybody, young and old, men and women, we're all going to be prophesying. And on the other hand, it's sort of like, okay, dreams, they come, they go, they disappear, right? But the touchstone is only the reverence for God. And Reb Mark, I think you actually have a musical setting for this.
And the old shall dream dreams, and the youth shall see visions, and our hope shall rise up to the sky. We must live for today, we must build for tomorrow. Give us time, give us strength, give us a life. Debbie Friedman, Zichronot Livracha.
Thank you. Yay! So, and then in the Talmud, we also have this same sort of ambivalence towards dreams, right? Where Rabbi Meir says dreams neither help nor harm, right? They're basically inconsequential. They don't have any practical impact, right? They're just ephemeral and projections that come in the night. Where on the other hand, in Masechet Brachot, in the section of the Talmud that deals with blessings and the structure of service, Rav Yehuda said in the name of his teacher Rav, and this is my favorite Talmudic quote about dreams, there are three things for which one should pray: good rulers, melech tov, good governance, good years, and good dreams. And then the Talmud gives a biblical quote to support each of these positions. And the last one is taken from the book of Isaiah, and it's a quote from King Hezekiah, who's saying to Isaiah, who is actually his son-in-law, at a time when Hezekiah is very sick, right? And Isaiah comes to visit him. And he says, "V'tachalimeni v'hachayeni." He says, "You heal me through dreams, and thereby cause me to live." Right? And we could spend one whole section in the ancient world in terms of the connection between dreams and healing. Right? Particularly, some of you might have heard of the Temple of Asclepius, for example, which were dream sanctuaries, and the devotees would come there and spend weeks there, fasting and preparing themselves, trying to inculcate visions, trying to seed visions that would somehow then lead to their physical healing. And in addition, some of you perhaps know the story in the New Testament, right, in the Gospels, about the waters of Bethesda, right, where Jesus goes into this mikvah in Bethesda, and there's this person who's lying and he's crippled and bad, and Jesus comes in and heals him. And there's all these cripples and people who are ill there. And so the question is, what's going on? So it seems that there were these dream sanctuaries, these Asclepian temples throughout the Middle East, including in the land of Israel, in Bethesda, Beit Chisda, right, the house of loving devotion, right? And Jesus went to this place where you had people who were trying to find healing in these temples, and he comes and heals one of these people. And what's interesting is that the Talmud talks about this dream temple also. It says that, idols and this sort of thing, but they're really not efficacious, they're vanity, stoned, and somebody says, yeah, but there's this place in Bethesda, and they have a statue there, and when the Spirit comes across the water, people are healed, right? So we have verification in the Talmud about these notions of these dream sanctuaries where people would come in order to try to find healing. Okay, so we have both in the Tanakh and in the Talmud this notion, this kind of like bifurcation between dreams are inconsequential and dreams are the most consequential. Also, in relationship to just a reference that you might come across, if in any of your readings you ever come across the term the rabbinic dream book, it's Masechet Brachot. It's a section of the Talmud, like 55 to 58, folios 55 to 58, one of which I've quoted here, and I'll quote a few others from there. That's the section of the Talmud that deals with dreams, the Babylonian Talmud that deals with dreams, right? So if you ever find a reference to the rabbinic dream book, that's what it's talking about. It's not like a separate text that was published, right, like a separate volume, but rather it was part of this folio. It was these folios in the Tractate Brachot that deal with blessings and the structure of our services. So now, what does our tradition tell us about the dynamics of dreaming? Okay. So, it seems that there are two, there are two minds in terms of whether dreams are efficacious or not. There seem to also be of two minds in terms of what are the source of dreams. And these actually track into other religious traditions and actually even in terms of contemporary writers. So that one is that dreams are a byproduct of our psychology, right? They're interpsychic experiences that are summoned to us based on our experiences during the day. So Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani said in the name of Rabbi Yonatan, one is shown in a dream only what is suggested in one's own thoughts. And then he has this quote from the book of Daniel, where Daniel is telling Belshazzar, well, kings, the thoughts of your mind, those come to you when you're sleeping on your bed, right? Including somebody who's dreaming of striking it rich here, right? So on the one hand, you have this idea that dreams are intrapsychic events, right? And to a large extent, that was the work of Freud and those who were his students, his commentators, and his critics, starting in the beginning of the 20th century, right? With the notion that dreams basically take place, within ourselves, and the unconscious breaking through into, and giving us messages that our conscious minds might not recognize. Because now even, in terms of people who deal with, psychoneurology and these sorts of things, we know that we take in far more information than our waking minds register, right? And so this is, they come up to us. And we'll talk a little bit about later and what their functions are. Okay. So on the one hand, they said, well, dreams, are intrapsychic events. They're psychological, triggered by experiences that we have during the day. But also in the Talmud, there's this notion that dreams are transcendent events. And for the most part, in antiquity and up through the 19th century of the Common Era, for the most part, there was this sense that because we don't have control over our dreams, it's not something that we will and call into being, that therefore they really felt that dreams were visitations from transcendent realms, whether they were from above, right, in terms of visitations of angels, messengers from God, images that were sent by God, or they can also come from the earth. They can come from deceased relatives. And particularly in the Sephardic community, in the North African Jewish community, and people have done studies about this that you can read, that there were actually practices, and there's some people still to this day who will go to graveyards and go to sleep on the gravestones, which are considered to be, thin places in terms of the separation between what's on this side of the veil of mortality and what's on the other side, in order to receive dreams, and messages from relatives or from teachers who've passed away, right? And there's even some studies that were done in terms of North African Jewish communities that when they were, had to flee and going to the state of Israel, right, that they had people like go to the graveyards and dreamed of their teachers, and then when they came to Israel, some teacher or some member of the community would have a dream, and the saint from their home community in Tunisia or Morocco would appear to them and say, okay, this is your place, right, and I'm still with you here, right? So we'll talk a little bit more about dream incubation, right? But one of the methods of dream incubation was actually going to graveyards, right, and sleeping, because if you go to Spain, or you go to some countries, that unlike us having headstones or footstones, right, they had gravestones that covered the entire grave, right. So, and in addition to that, for the European Christians, they would go into the churches and sleep either near the relics or sleep under the stained glass that had depictions of the different saints and that's how they incubated dreams. And that St. Augustine was so outraged by this that he got one of the ecumenical councils to forbid Christians from doing this, and the folk ignored him anyway. So we have records like going into the British Isles in the 1900s and that, of people before some big communal event, meeting in the church and sleeping in the church that night in order to receive inspiration and message before they went out to accomplish, whether it was going to war or some communal task that had to be done. So, Devorah, you have your hand up?
I do. This is fascinating. So I just want to be sure, if you're going to sleep in a graveyard and you want a message from someone who's passed, do you have to sleep in the graveyard where they're buried, or you just have to be in a similar space?
So, ideally, one would go to the graveyard where they are. But, for example, those communities that moved from Tunisia, Morocco, Algiers, right, and moved to the land of Israel. Now they couldn't go to those graveyards anymore, right? So that they would, try to find where the thin places were, where they had moved to, whether it was, in a graveyard or whether it was in their synagogue, right, or some just in their home. And there are all sorts of texts. I mean, we could just do a whole session on dream incubation, including how you see the dream, where you go, what side you sleep on, whether you write it out or not, how you face the intention, and also, as it turns out, amethyst is considered to be the dream stone for incubating dreams. Why? It was one of the 12 stones in the breastplate of the high priest. And in Hebrew, the word for amethyst is ochalima, right? Which, if you break it into two words, is achalom ma. What shall I dream? Right? I actually have an amethyst amulet with amethyst on the tree of life, on the Eitz Chaim, that I sometimes wear when I do one of these dream groups. So this whole question of incubating dreams is like a whole major subject in and of itself. And as you can imagine, for the monotheistic religions, this becomes a big problem. Dream incubation. Let me just throw it back to the group. Why do you think dream incubation would be a problem for a monotheistic tradition?
That's a good question.
Think about it for a second. If dreams come from God, and you're trying to incubate a dream, what are you in effect trying to do?
Make God talk to you.
Make God talk to you. Make God do something, right? So in the traditions of Greece and Rome, I was going to say pagan, but then it has a whole other meaning now, right? You have all of these, including the temples of Asclepius, all these rites in terms of dream incubation. We do have in the Hebrew Bible, by the way, 2 instances probably of dream incubation, but they're kind of hazy. One is when the prophet Samuel sleeps within the Mishkan, sleeps within the tabernacle in Shiloh, and he hears God calling him, right? And finally he goes to the high priest Eli, who's his mentor, and says, Father, did you call me? And he does this 3 times, and finally the old priest gets to say, wait a second. Oh, we haven't had this kind of revelation for a long time. But go back into to the sanctuary, sleep there, and if you hear a voice calling you, say, Father, God, here I am, call me, I'm ready to go. And the other is when King Solomon takes the throne and goes up to Gilad and brings all these sacrifices, sleeps in the sanctuary there before he builds the temple, and God appears to him, and asks him what he wants at the beginning of his reign. And he says he wants a Lev Shomea, a listening heart, right? Which is why we named the first spiritual direction training program Lev Shomea. It was based on that particular insight. And God says to him, because you haven't asked for wealth or power, I'll grant you all of those and wisdom of a hearing heart. So those are 2 instances in the Tanakh where we actually have a dream incubation, but they're not, they're kind of clouded. So in Jewish tradition, it's not so much incubating dreams, but it's called she'elat chalom, posing a dream question, right? And there are all sorts of techniques for doing this. And in the 16th century of the Common Era, there was a book from a Rabbi Yaakov of Maghreb, 16th or 13th, I keep getting mixed up, right? Which is called Shelotu Tshuvot Min HaShamayim, responsive from heaven, in which when he had a difficult, halachic question, he would pose a dream question, go to sleep, and wake up the next morning, and the answer, the halachic answer, would be revealed to him in a dream. So, so we have this kind of, Vanessa Oakes wrote a popular little book called the Jewish Dream Book. And she and her daughter, who wrote it with her, have some instances in which ways in which they try to pose dream questions.
Howard, before you go on, would you help us all get on the same page here? I understand what you mean when you say a thin place. Mm-hmm. Can you just quickly, beregel echad, on one foot?
Thank you. So there are certain places within the world that where the barrier between our empirical reality as we live it and the spirit world, where that barrier seems to be much more porous. And like Mount Sinai was such a place. Where in England, Bobby and I went there on one of the first trip we ever took together. Stonehenge. There are places in South America, that are considered to be thin places, right? For those of us who used to go to the Eilat Chaim up in Accord, the Jewish Renewal Retreat Center, there's been like so much sanctity that had been, in prayers and everything. That for many of us, we found that to be like a thin place, where the spirit was more accessible. Right? So that's what that term means. Thank you for bringing that up. Where it seems as if the barrier between this reality and other realms of reality is thinner and more porous. the divine is, and spirit is more accessible. So there is, so in Masechet Brachot, it says, for example, in terms of dreams as visitations, if you're visited, by a vision of one of the biblical kings of Israel, if David appears to you in a dream, then you hope for piety because he's the author of Psalms. If Solomon appears to you, then you hope for wisdom because he was the author of Proverbs, right? And if Ahab, who was the married to Queen Jezebel, who was Elijah, the prophet Elijah's big adversary, if he appears, then you got to watch out, like you're going to get schmeiced, right? if you're visited by Ahab in a dream. So in terms of looking at dreams as having transcendent sources, one is the notion of dreams as visitations. The other is dreams as a sense of the soul. Okay, so, hello? Okay, so, in Masechet Brachot, when in the Zohar, the magnum opus, the major corpus of Spanish Kabbalah from the 13th century, right? And when in one of the places it talks about revelation, it says God has brought into existence a series of grades of revelation, and the dream is the 6th grade of revelation. And we'll see a little bit later. The whole question is, what is the relationship between prophecy, visions, right, which we have while we're awake, and then dreams, which we have at night? And so one of the schema for making this differentiation is found in the Zohar, which they say that prophecy, which is the highest level of revelation, just beneath that of Moses, because Moses is the only one who knew God face to face, so he got his revelation right from the highest supernal sphirot of chokhmah, of wisdom and bina, of understanding, of their connection, right? For everybody else, for other prophets, they get their prophecy comes from the relationship between Tiferet, which is the heart space in the tree of life, and Malchut, the last one, Shekhinah, as we know her, which is the last of the Sfirot, the divine feminine, the bride, and that Tiferet and Malchut, splendor, or beauty, also known as Rachamim, compassion, and Malchut and sovereignty, they're called the Du Partsufim, like the two lovers, the two faces of God. And so when they're in connection with each other, prophets can receive their vision and their wisdom from the overflow of the love and the connection between those two sfirot. So that's 1 and 2. Then visions that visionaries have during the day, which is the next grade of revelation, is the connection between, as you see on the Netzach and Hod. Netzach is the endurance, the victory of God, the continuing, perduring aspect of God, and Hod is the splendor of God, right? And so when those two are in alignment with each other, that's the realm of visions. Then their overflow of the divine, shefa, of effulgence of the divine energy, then people can tap into that for visions. And then finally, right beneath the level of the Sfirot is the level of the archangels, right? And as you see right at the bottom, so Michael is on the right, and Gabriel is on the left. And so according to the Zohar, this particular schema, the realm of dreams comes from the interconnection between Michael and Gabriel. Okay, so if we talk about the dream as the 6th grade, right? So if you're going down the Sfirot, Tiferet, they're counting Tiferet as 1, Malchut is 2, Netzach is 3, Hod is 4, Michael is 5, and Gabriel is 6. And Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, is considered to be the Sar HaChalomot, right? He the Baal HaChalomot. He's the angelic master of dreams. So according to this particular schema of dreams representing the ascension of the soul, then this selection goes on and says, so when one sleeps, the soul leaves and soars aloft. God then reveals to the soul through that grade, right, through the 6th grade, through Gabriel, future events or things to serve as warnings. For no revelation comes to the body, comes when the body is in full vigor, because then we're engaged in our daily lives, right? So the linear, ego-driven achievement, frontal lobe consciousness, right? That's what's online, and in terms of what's in the unconscious, it's hard. It's harder to tap into that, right? So, but when we're asleep, Gabriel, the Bala Chalomot, the master of dreams, communicates things to the soul. The soul transmits them. Dreams then originate on high when the souls leave the body, each one taking its own route. Okay. So, time for a little pop quiz. What Jewish prayer that's recited every morning, and we teach, it's one of the first prayers we teach to children, reflects this reality. It's actually based in this understanding of dreams from the Zohar. Dum bum ba da 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 dum bum ba da da da. Anybody? Modeh ani lefanecha. Right. I give thanks before you, Melech El Chai V'Kayam. Right. Eternal and enduring sovereign. That you've returned my soul to me. Right. You compassionately return my soul to me. Rabba emunatecha, great is your faithfulness that you return it to me every night. Right? This is what this particular prayer is talking about. That prayer that we teach our kids, probably the either it's the first one taught or it's the one right after the Shema, which we teach in religious school, right, is based on this Zohar and this vision of dreaming. That when the body goes to sleep, the soul ascends on high, each according to, our own achievements, levels, our own inclinations, and that. Gabriel whispers messages to us, kind of either warnings, right? And what's, of course, interesting, and in one of the articles that I sent you, I do this comparison in terms of Freud and Jung in relationship to some of this traditional material. And, of course, one of the things that they both indicate is dreams, especially Jung, dreams, one of its functions is dreams come to us as warnings, right? That, in other words, when our lives are becoming too unbalanced, right, the unconscious kind of goes like, okay, you got to achieve balance. You're going too far. You got to come back to the other side. Okay, and in one of Jung speaks about one of his analysants who came to him, and this fellow was an extreme mountaineer, right? So he climbed these big scales, Alps and all that sort of thing. And he told Jung that he had this dream in which he had climbed to the top of some big peak, and then he stepped off into the air. And Jung, hearing this, said, I think you better dial it back a little bit. Your dream is warning you, that maybe you're stepping off and taking it too far. And the guy says, no, I'm experienced, I know what I'm doing, this sort of thing. And of course, Jung finds out 2 weeks later that the fellow had a climbing accident when he was up on some high peak and fell to his death. Right? So this is, one case from Jung where the dream actually, came, which was a warning. And there's in the Talmud, there's a statement that says that anybody who doesn't dream at least once a week is considered Ra. And the word Ra here is not evil, right? That's Resha. Ra either means unfortunate, or it can mean bad, like woe, harmful, right? And both are the case, right? Because on the one hand, it's unfortunate if you're so disconnected from your unconscious that you don't get any messages even, once a week. Now, the fact that we found that that dreams actually, that all mammals dream regularly, including they've chased us in dogs and that sort of thing. It's not that you don't dream at night, it's whether you remember your dreams. And I can actually send out, some information to the group. I've done up a resource sheets that I use with some of my dream groups. Mark, if you remember, I'll send it to you. People like, how do you remember your dreams? How to see the waking dream if, you don't remember your dreams at night, or even how to deal with some of your projections from your unconscious if you want to, get those messages. So that this section in the Talmud says, like, somebody who doesn't have connection with his or her unconscious at least once a week, is unfortunate and also ra. It can be bad because you can either endanger yourself or you might act out, and because you haven't heard, the warning from your unconscious, like maybe I better pay attention to this, that you can actually, like this mountain climber, you can actually put yourself in danger. Right, if you're that disconnected, from what's going on underneath the consciousness. So, Reb Mark, you had your hand up?
Well, you answered it, I think. What I was going to ask is, do you have to be able to remember your dream? And it's very possible you might be dreaming, but don't remember that you dream. In which case, are you Ra, or do you get a pass?
So Ra in this case means unfortunate. It's not that you're evil or you're bad, right? But you're missing out on some of your own, either messages from above or inner resources.
So if you don't remember the dream, then you can't have the possibility of integrating it into your life, taking a closer look at it, and that's Ra. That's like
it's unfortunate, right?
Yeah.
And it, in the extreme circumstances, it could lead to harm. And so I'll send out this resource in terms of how we either might be able to remember or other ways to tap into, through visions, through memories, right? Through art, through music. There are ways in which you can tap into your unconscious, even if you don't remember your nocturnal dreams, right? So none of us have to be sentenced to be Ra, be unfortunate, right? We all get a crack at it. So, now this whole question of terms of, do dreams tell us the future? And there's actually this whole area of dream studies now, which is called psi dreams, PSI, psi dreams, which are dreams, where you get premonitions through dreams that somehow you're picking up signals. We're picking up signals from the environment, right? That our unconscious is registering, okay. And or non-local dreams, dreaming of something you're in one place and dreaming of something that is taking place some in another place, or telepathic dreams, where you can dream, and have insight or gain into things that are at a distance from you, that are not in physical proximity with you, okay. And just to tell you, that such things do exist. Even though the science, they still have not been able to track down, like, what's the science. But I can tell you, for example, that they're recounting that when the Taliban, right, Bin Laden was planning 9/11, he was really afraid that people in the West were going to pick up warnings through the dream waves that the attack was coming. And I think some of us might have read that prior to 9/11, actually there were probably 20 recorded cases of people calling in and saying, I had this dream about planes crashing into buildings. But nobody knew like when or where or whatever, but it was showing up, right? And actually, interestingly, that Islam of the three Western faiths is probably the biggest world dream culture, in existence. Right, and they do like posing dream questions it's called istikhara, kind of like it's a regular practice among people. And so when I mentioned it in the class that I taught on dreams at Temple University, one of my students raised and says, "Oh yeah, my istikhara, my aunt and I, we do get together once a week, to pose dream questions and to, and then how we get our answers." Okay. And in terms of these psi dreams, non-local dreams, one experience that I had was, some of you might know Reb Razel Raphael, right? So Reb Razel. So this is years ago that a bunch of us were at Reb Mordechai Liebling and Lynn Iser's home they were celebrating their anniversary. They're dear friends. And Razel has one of her songs, like, we are a circle, circle, circle of love. We are some of you might have heard it. And so she starts, we are a circle, circle, circle of love. And a few of us men got behind her like we were the pips, Like she was Gladys Knight, and we're going rolling, rolling, rolling in a circle of love, rolling, right? The next day, a friend of Raisel's, who she hadn't seen in years, calls her from Montreal and says, Raisel, you're not going to believe what happened. Like, I just had this dream. You and I were in this dream, and you and I were Ike and Tina Turner singing Proud Mary. Honest to God. It's like, yeah, that's sort of like what happened. So, Mark?
Okay, so I'm the fact checker here, and you are absolutely telling the truth about these dreaming before 9/11. And something interesting I found here, a number of people reporting before, and then a researcher named Dr. Barker termed people who experienced these type of vivid, distressing premonitions as quote-unquote human seismographs.
We'll talk about that a little bit more next week, because this whole thing in terms of dreaming in dark times, that one of the functions that our dreams play is the seismographic function, that it picks up emotional currents and what's happening in society, right, even before it's being recognized. So there's premonitory, but it's also it's picking up emotions and things that people aren't even reporting. Yeah, Devora?
Well, you haven't mentioned in that category, in your list of types of dreams, about actually having dreams about things that actually do happen.
I'm going to get to that. You know,
Okay.
I'm talking a little bit about, more unusual ones. If I don't get, I think it's coming up in the presentation. If I don't, well, I raise your hand again. I promise I will come back to it.
Okay.
We have had some allusion to that, right? In the Talmudic statement, right? The dreams are products of what happens, during the day that then sparks your psyche. So, oftentimes what happens, I might as well deal with it a little bit because I don't have any slide about this. I'll try to be brief, which is always difficult for me because most rabbis were inoculated with phonograph needles, so therefore it's like, and I certainly, not your rabbi, but me, I certainly am afflicted with that. So basically, in terms of the process of dreaming, and I'll see, Mark, I'll actually see if I can find an article that, that it's accessible, that people can read about this. But basically what happens, there's been studies in terms of what's the function of dreaming. So a big part of the function of dreaming is in terms of incorporating, not only cognitively, but emotional, psychocognitive, emotional, spiritual assimilation and integration of our experiences, that we're having at this particular moment, right, during the day or recently, with our store of experiences and knowledge and things that have come up during our lives. And this is how at night we integrate the new into the store and the structures of what we have. Okay? And that is probably many of you have heard that dreams, the most vivid ones in particular, are tied to our REM cycles, rapid eye movement cycles within dreams. So there are cycles of dreams throughout the night. Okay? And that what happens often is that, and the functions that when we dream, maybe I don't have it right here, but I could bring it up, that there are actually diagrams, I'll send one out to everybody, of the brain in terms of what part of the brain goes offline when we sleep, when we dream. Particularly the major motor cortex goes offline. Otherwise, we'd be asleep and wandering out in the camp, and the bears would be eating us. Right? And there is a feeling that people who sleepwalk, that their major motor cortex doesn't completely go offline when they sleep, and that could be part of what, so they're having this dream and then they're walking and acting it out. Also, our temporal spatial, the part of the brain that deals with temporal spatial location also goes offline. So that's why you can be here and all of a sudden you're up on the ceiling, and in the next, in the next vignette, you're 100 miles away, right? It's because the spatial temporal, the part of the brain that deals with spatial temporal orientation goes offline also. What remains firmly online is cognitive emotional processing, right? How we, like our heart mind, how we feel about things, right? And that gets processed usually through different cycles, right? And that as actually predating Jung by about 6 centuries in the Sefer Hasidim of the Hasidei Ashkenaz, it actually talks about the fact that symbols are the language of dreams. Metaphors are the language of dreams. And the way that Sefer Hasidim says it is that with dreams, when you dream, it's like going into a foreign country. And the people there speak a different language. And the wise learn to communicate through signs and come to understand what those signs mean. Right? So already the 13th century German Jewish mystical pietists got it. Right? They understood that the dreams, the language of dream is metaphor. So Freud thought that that our minds converted into metaphors to hide what's going on, and Jung says no, that's actually the language of dreams is imagery and metaphor. Okay, and so as we sleep, we're integrating what we've learned, what we've experienced in that during the day, particularly things and the things that are retained are usually things that have strong emotive power to it, right? And then they get worked into the structure, so that there are cycles of dreams, and that sometimes if you remember, like I had a dream then, and then another dream, if like you remember 3 dreams in your night, chances are what you're having is a progression, right? As your mind is integrating this material, the new material with the structure of your feeling knowledge at that time. So a really good question when when you have a dream or working with a dream is, let's say, for example, that Sherry appears. She was a friend of yours from high school, and you haven't thought about Sherry in 20 years. And all of a sudden, poof, Sherry is in your dream. So one of the things you might want to ask yourselves, or in any of these images, is kind of like, why is my unconscious, or why is the spirit sending me this image at this particular time in this dream? What does this represent to me? Right? So it's not Sherry in your dream. You could say she was a visitation, or your dad came, it was a visitation. Or it could be, that if you take the other view, that so what does this person symbolize to you? And Jung says that usually Jung and Fritz Perls, who was the founder of Gestalt therapy, and J.L. Moreno, who was the founder of psychodrama. It's one thing that almost all therapists, founders of psychological movements agreed on. They agreed on nothing. This they agreed on, that from a subjective interpretation, every image in your dream is an aspect of the dreamer. Right? So if this person appears in your dream, like, okay, why is this person? Was she or he, or this image symbolized to me? And then, what aspect of me might be being brought to the forefront in this dream? So I'll give you one example, and I see that let me ask for a group conscience. Since we didn't get started for 15 minutes, can people stay on another 15 minutes? Or we have to get off right away? Mark, can you take a group conscience?
It's fine with me. Let me see thumbs. If you need to go, and you can watch the end of the recording.
Okay. So I'll give you an example of this from a dream that one of my congregants had when I served the I retired from my pulpit about 16 years. My last pulpit 11 years ago. So there was a woman in my congregation, and she had very difficult problems with walking. She was getting a hip replacement. I went to visit her in the hospital or a rehab center, and she said to me, "Rabbi, my dead brother came to me in a dream last night, And she was like really frightened, like, is he coming to call me to, like, my time's up and he's calling me to the next world? And I said to her, Susan, tell me about your brother. And like, give me descriptors of your brother. What kind of person he was? And turns out, he was very resolute. He was cheerful. He was buoyant. He had a lot of resilience. All these sorts of things, right? And I said, well, it could be that your brother was coming to call you, but I don't think that's the case, right? I think that what the image of your brother is to remind you that you have some of these particular qualities within you. That's why his image came up at this particular time, and that you can call on your own resilience, strength, buoyancy, right, to help you navigate this, and to start walking again. And indeed, she did. And, for a time, after the surgery really helped her in terms of her walking. She got through the surgery successfully, and she healed for a period of time, right? So that's one, idea of, what's going on. And then if you get an image from the past, it's okay, well, why is it coming now? And what's it trying to tell me about now? And how am I integrating this? Because, as you're sleeping, this is what's going on. In terms of your neuropsychology. And that's why, for example, students who think they're going to stay up and cram all night for an exam usually do worse than students who study before, get a good night's sleep, and then take the exam. And there have been all kinds of studies that show that the students who get a night's sleep beforehand actually do better. And we all know the thing like, let me sleep on it. Right? I have a problem, let me sleep. I wake up in the morning, okay, that's the mystery that's going on, with dreams and your sleep. Okay, so we have this notion of dreams as being prophecy, because there's actually a little exercise I'd like you to do. So I'm gonna, I'm not gonna spend as much time here. Okay, here's this notion that dreams are a 60th of prophecy. 60 is like in the Babylonian, right, like our clocks, 60 minutes to an hour, 60 seconds to a minute, right? It wasn't base 10, it was base 60. So a 60th part was a minutia, right? So dreams were considered to be like a minutia of prophecy, right? We have, it's the 6th grade and 1/60th, okay? And just to point out to you that this first quote from the Talmud, from Masechet Chagiga, where Rabbah said, though the Blessed Holy One declared, I will surely hide my face on that day, God also said, I speak to him in a dream. Right? In this case, the second quote is from Numbers, and this is when Moses, because Moses has been separating himself from his wife, right, from Zipporah, not living with her, that Miriam and Aaron start to gossip about Moses. They're speaking, they're not racially slandering Zipporah, who is from the tribe of Cushan, right, that's Cushita of Midian, that she's darker skinned, but rather it's Alodot on her behalf. And they said, we're prophets too, And God says to him, God says to them, well, I appear to you guys in dreams and visions, right? But only to Moses, Torah, do I speak face to face. Why is this so important? And I've written actually 2 articles about this, published 2 articles about this, is that after the period of prophecy ends during the Second Temple, right, where the Torah then becomes the oracle, right? How do we find out what we want from what's God's will? We don't have reliable prophets anymore, right? So we go to the Torah. That becomes the oracle. And here in Deuteronomy, it says that, God speaks through dreams. So dreams are a lesser form of revelation, but they are revelation. And therefore, many of the techniques that we find in the Midrash for interpreting Torah actually are taken from Egyptian and Babylonian dream interpretation techniques, right? Including analogies and gematrias, and actually the great Talmudist of the Jewish Theological Seminary, Saul Lieberman, in 1950, in his book Hellenism and Jewish Palestine, actually was the first one to point this out. that many of the techniques for homiletic midrash that we find in rabbinic literature and just take for granted actually come from Near Eastern dream interpretation techniques based on this particular verse. Right? Well, dreams are we don't have prophets, but we have dreams or revelation. And so therefore, we can use the same techniques to interpret the Torah that we use to interpret dreams. Okay? And so our whole tradition of midrash actually comes, it has its roots in dream interpretation. And then this last one, and some of you might have even seen this, quote of Rav Chisda, that a dream left uninterpreted is like a letter left unread. Right? It's like a letter from God left unread. In what way? Because of the fact that if you don't read the letter, you don't know what's coming, and you can't prepare for it. Right? And so that if you don't look into your dream and see what your unconscious is trying to tell you, how are you going to prepare for it? Either you have to do tshuva, mend your ways, it's warning me, whatever it might be. So that's the statement from Reb Chisda. Reb Mark?
So I'm understanding something, a quote that's attributed to Reb Heschel in a different, more expanded way. I once heard that he said that all of Torah is midrash, which makes a lot more sense if we... hearing you say that, underscore that after the temple was destroyed, the age of prophecy ended, and so we had to rely then on the Torah to understand God's will, right? And so we have to look in the white spaces between the black letters,
right?
And out of that's a powerful understanding for me of why he would say that all of Torah is midrash. If we are, if we're dealing with Torah as a dream, a live dream in real time.
So
does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and that is one valence of what he said. The other, which also has to deal with dream work, is the fact that, as we know, the dream itself, what we experience, right, the various, ephemera, and the visions in the night and that, and what we write down afterwards, right, as we're transposing the dream, and then what you tell your friend, or your spouse, or your partner, or whomever, about your dream, that you're already interpreting and moving from the dream. That's already midrash on the dream. So in this case, what Heschel is talking about is revelation is in this case, he and Buber were somewhat similar. A revelation is the meeting between God and humanity, right? Which is, which is ineffable, right? You can't say exactly what it is. You can only say what it's like. And so therefore, when we starting to write down and bring into, our own, literal, our structures of thought and that, and write that down so it's intelligible in language and that sort of thing. What we're writing down is already midrash on our dreams, right? When we write down our dream, when we retell it, that's not the dream. That's already couple of degrees removed from that. That's the transposition, the communication, the midrash on the dream, right? And so that's also the point that Heschel is making there. Right, so which ties into dream work. Okay. All right, so I'm going to leave off this part about the dream amelioration rites, and maybe I'll come back to it next week because I want to give us a little exercise. Okay, and there were actually three different. If you have a troubling dream, there are actually three different rites that you find in the Talmud in terms of how to sweeten the dream, how to respond to it. One is actually a dream fast, right? Or if you have a really troubling dream, one of the ways to deal with it is to fast the day afterwards. And interestingly enough, this was considered so important that if you had a bad dream on a Friday night, you were allowed to fast on Shabbos day. And if you think about it, right? What's the only day that you're, in the Jewish calendar year, you're allowed to fast on Shabbat? We all know. What day? Anybody can shout it out.
Yom Kippur.
Yeah,
Yom Kippur, right? Tisha B'Av, the Great Black Fast, gets moved to the Thursday before. It gets moved to the Sunday afterwards, right? All the other fasts, including, the 24-hour fast, Tisha B'Av, the Great Black Fast, they all get moved. Yom Kippur is the only day that you're allowed to fast on Shabbos, unless you have a really troubling dream on Friday night, in which case you're allowed to do a dream fast on Shabbat day, which is kind of amazing. Okay, next week I'll come back to these other things. Okay, so I'm putting up on the screen the story, kind of an abridged version of the story of Joseph interpreting the dream of the royal cupbearer and the royal baker. Okay, so here's it up on the stream. Would somebody like to read it for us? I've done a lot of talking. Somebody willing to read this for us?
I can read.
Please.
Hold on, I have to make it bigger. Sometime afterward, Pharaoh was angry with the chief cupbearer and the chief baker, placing them in the same jail where Joseph was confined, who became their attendant. After some time, both had dreams on the same night, each with its own meaning. When Joseph came to them, he saw that they looked disturbed. "Why do you look so troubled today?" "We have had dreams, but there is no one to interpret them." Joseph replied, "Do not interpretations come from God? Please tell me the dreams." Then the chief cupbearer told Joseph his dream. "I saw a vine in front of me, and on the vine there were 3 branches. It had barely budded when its blossoms ripened into grapes. So I took the grapes, pressed them out into his cup, and put it in Pharaoh's hand." Joseph said, "The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head and restore you to your post. You will again hand Pharaoh his cup. Only think of me when all is well with you." When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said, "I too had a dream. In it, I had 3 bread baskets on my head. In the top one were all kinds of bakery products for Pharaoh, but the birds were eating them out of the basket on my head." Joseph said to him in reply, "This is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up your head from your shoulders, impale you on a stake, and the birds will eat your flesh." On the 3rd day, which was his birthday, Pharaoh gave a banquet for all his servants, singling out the chief cupbearer and chief baker. He restored the chief cupbearer to his office, but the chief baker he impaled, just as Joseph had told them in his interpretation.
Okay, so, question for the group. Take a couple minutes to study this. What do you think tipped Joseph off that this was what was going on? What were the things that tipped Joseph off in these dreams, And Joseph is like one of the chief trustees in the prison. So he knows what's going on in the prison, outside the prison, right? He's connected. One thing about Joseph, he's not physically violent, but he always winds up in charge, right? That's why, he's like the forceful energy in Kabbalah of the tree of life, of Yesod, right? He's the forceful, generative male energy. Like, he always is in charge, okay? So what do you think is going on here from what Joseph might know and what he could tell from the way the baker and the butler were acting and what's in their dreams that might have led him to this improper interpretation?
Would you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, the question is, what tipped Joseph off? That, that the baker was going to be killed, and that the cupbearer was going to be restored to his post. What, like within the dreams, and also what might have been going on that Joseph knew about, the court, its practices, these sorts of things, all of which might have tipped off Joseph, that the cupbearer is going to be restored and the baker is going to get it. That he's going to be punished. Because on the surface, there are factors of these dreams that seem very similar.
He might have already known that in 3 days Pharaoh was having a banquet and that decisions are going to be made.
Yes, very good. Thank you. That's Roxanne.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, right. So he knows already. Like the Pharaoh's birthday is coming up, and he knows at that time, he grants favors, and also, he executes people. Right. So okay. So that's the tip off about the three. Okay. What else might be a tip off? Well, things are going to go well for the cupbearer, and it's curtains for the baker.
Well, the cupbearer seems troubled when he comes to Jacob with the dream.
Well, they're both kind of troubled, right? They're both kind of troubled, okay? But what's the difference between the cupbearer and the baker in terms of coming to Joseph?
The cupbearer goes when he hears a favorable interpretation
Well,
of the other dream.
who's the one?
Sorry, the baker came when he heard the favorable interpretation of the cupbearer's dream.
Right. So already the cupbearer, we get the sense he's a little bit more forthcoming, right? They're both troubled by their dreams, but he's a little more optimistic, right? He comes forward first, and the other guy's like in the corner. And it's only after he hears the favorable interpretation, oh, maybe it's not so bad. Okay, great. Okay, what else might be a tip-off within the dreams?
The birds are eating out of the basket on his head. That doesn't
Yeah,
sound
of the baker's basket, right? And I even saw a little bit more in this when I just read it, right? The baker has 3 baskets on his head. Where does he have the basket that has Pharaoh's baked goods? Which basket is that one?
top one.
The top one, right? Right. And that, of course, is exposed to whom? Who's it exposed to? Everybody can unmute, don't you?
The birds.
The birds.
Exactly, the birds.
It's a Hitchcock film.
Right, like the Hitchcock film, right? So what does this tell us about the quality of the service that the baker has been giving to Pharaoh?
He's not pampering him. He's not taking care of his stuff.
He's not taking care of the stuff. Like, what an idiot, right? Like put the other guy's stuff up on the top. Guard Pharaoh's stuff, We have some layers between there. So we already get a sense, right, that he hasn't been taking care of business. Right, and hasn't been treating Pharaoh with the proper his baked goods with the proper respect. Okay, and how does that contrast with the dream of the cupbearer?
He quickly makes the wine. He responds to with the buds and all that. He quickly makes the wine and he quickly puts it in Pharaoh's hand directly.
Right. He doesn't mess around.
Yeah.
And also, he seems pretty meticulous about it, right? Mm-hmm. He takes the grapes and he presses them and he makes sure it gets into Pharaoh's hand, right? So he seems to be very thoughtful and meticulous in terms of his ministry to Pharaoh. And the other guy puts Pharaoh's stuff up on the top where it's going to be eaten by the birds. Okay? So that Joseph can already hear just from their dreams, right, in terms of what's happened in their daily lives, right? One fellow's more confident, the other's, holding back. One fellow's more, in his dream, is more meticulous in his service to Pharaoh, and the other guy's like clueless. Okay? And then in addition to that, who appears in one dream who doesn't appear in the other?
Oh. Pharaoh.
Pharaoh, right? Pharaoh appears in the cupbearer's dream, and he's there and he takes it from the cupbearer, right? And Pharaoh doesn't appear at all in the second guy's dream. Like, Pharaoh's done with him, right? Pharaoh's not there. Okay? And so that all of these different elements, both from what Joseph knew from waking life and from the images within the dream, and from the numbers, well, what does 3 represent? Okay, that from all of these tips in waking life, right, and in the context of the dream and its images, that helps, like, it's not only like, interpretation comes from God, but it also, it comes from, humanity and experience, being able to see the metaphors, see the symbols, read what the affect of each of the dreamers was, who's in the dream, who's not in the dream, right? And as I said, one question you might, ask in terms of your dream is like, why is this image appearing to me at this particular time? Another interesting question, that we have here is like, if, let's say, for example, that you have 4 members of your family, right? And in your dream, you're sitting down with 3 of them at table, like, who should be in the dream, who's not? Right, like just yesterday, I was in a dream group that I'm working with. That we have, like, there are 8 of us, and we're working, in terms of dreaming during dark times. It's a dream group, and each time different person shares a dream, and we work with it both projective dream group process, which we'll experience next week, and then also another kind of embodied imagery process, right, and getting some really rich stuff. And the dreamer shared a dream in which her husband, and her son were in this dream. It turns out that the dreamer and I are in the same minyan. And I asked her a question like, I know she has a daughter as well. Like, did you ask yourself, like, where's your daughter? Like, she's the missing 4th in that dream. So sometimes it's who's there, and sometimes it's almost like who's not there, who should be there. Or what's not there that should be there. And in this case, Pharaoh's in one, he's not in the other one. So why is Pharaoh missing? He's missing because he's already finished with this guy, and it's just going to take 3 more days for the guy to be finished off. Okay. So, hello. Okay, so what time do we have here? Oh, we're running up. So, I'm going to give you a homework assignment. Let me see if I can put this in the chat. Oops, not working. Okay, I will send you right afterwards this particular exercise. And this is one of the simplest exercises, can be very helpful in terms of working with your own dreams. Okay, it's called TTAQ. If you're going to give the dream a title, what would be the title of the dream? What's the major theme of the dream? What's the major emotion within the dream, your major affect? And also, what question is your unconscious trying to pose to you through this dream? What should you be aware? What's the dream? What is it trying to point out to you? My late teacher and friend Jeremy Taylor, who was one of the great dream practitioners and scholars of the 20th century, and Jeremy died, I guess, about close to 10 years now, 8 years ago. He always said, that our dreams, that the dreamer is the expert on his or her dream, right? But that in addition to that, dreams come to tell us something that our conscious minds don't know, right? Otherwise, why would we have them, right? So that dreams come to tell us something that we don't know, or ask a question of us, right? That in our waking life we haven't known, but maybe our dreams are telling us we should pay attention to. So also, what question is the dream trying to help the dreamer become aware of? So your homework for this week is to take the baker and the baker and the cupbearer's dream. I'll send that out as well. And if you want, work with that, right, in terms of, like, as a practice. And then if you remember any of your dreams over the course of this week, and like, okay, what does it mean? Here's one technique, very simple one. And next week we'll deal with 1 or 2 more in terms of how to work with your own dreams. So, as kind of like a final, any final questions or comments that folk might have? I know it's sort of been like a lot. Yes, Devorah.
It's been a lot. Maybe for next time, I want to talk about I want to hear what you have to say about dreams that actually are real, that really come true.
Well, I told you about a couple of them. Including that somebody had a dream, and they had a dream, about something that we were actually doing. The 9/11. So that they're definitely premonitory dreams, right? Part of the thing though is that there is a statement in the Talmud that says that you have to be careful to whom you tell your dreams, because it can take, because they can actually delay the dream coming through. And they talk about Joseph and his brothers, right? And Joseph told his brothers his dreams, and it took them 20 years for the dream to actually come true, right? So sometimes, it's delayed, right? In terms of when or the way in which it came true was not necessarily, how the symbolism was represented in the dream. So Joseph had this dream like his brothers were going to bow down to him. And in the other one, the sun, the moon, and the stars, like his father and mother were going to bow down to him. And then when they actually do, 20 years later, bow down to him in Pharaoh's court, he realizes that it wasn't for him to lord it over them, but for him to be a servant, leader for them. That God put me in this position in order to preserve life, yours and the lives of other people in the Near East. It wasn't for my own self-aggrandizement. But it took him 20 years for the dream to come true and for him to actually recognize, this is what the dream actually meant. So,
Beautiful. Go ahead. Closing up, Chatima?
Yes, we're closing up. So this is a Chatima. This is from one of the dream prayers that are recited during the threefold priestly benediction, which says, "You who are majestic on high and abides in might, your peace, your name is peace. May it be your will to bestow peace upon all of us. May God protect us, be gracious to us, and find favor within us. Amen."
Amen. Amen.
So, Mark, you have some music to play us out?
I do. Thank you so much. Next week, I'll make sure you all can get in. All righty, you all know the song. Let's sing it together. Oh, when I want you in my arms, when I want you, and all your charms whenever I want you. All I have to do is dream, 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 dream when I feel blue in the night and I need you to hold me tight whenever I want you. All I have to do is dream. I can make you mine, taste your lips of wine, anytime, night or day. Only trouble is, gee whiz, I'm dreaming my life away. I need you so, I could die, I love you so. And that is why whenever I want you, all I have to do is dream. Dream, 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 dream. Dream, 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 dream. Dream, dream, dream. Laila Tov, everyone. Next week, same bat time, same bat station.
Same bat channel.
Thank you.